everybody, welcome to another video. Today is going to be one of the more practical ones that I release. We're going to be talking about tarot and one of the ways that I best learned tarot. I love tarot a lot. It is one of the main divinatory tools that I use. And I actually use it for a lot more things. I use it as writing prompts. I use it as inspiration for characters I create when I write stories. I literally use tarot for everything. This will kind of be the first in the long line of kind of how to tarot videos, I guess. One thing I do want to mention, I will self-promote a little bit, but on my Twitch channel, one of the things that I do is I pull tarot cards. We have channel points, and the more that you watch, the more channel points you get, and you can redeem those for either learning a tarot card, pulling a single one, or I've also done full readings on stream too. So just kind of plug my own stuff. There's a bunch of content that I've saved of all of the tarot classes that I've done, card by card. If you are looking for more this card definition is this, that is a great place to go. I'll leave a link to that below. One of the main things that I'm going to talk about today is how I learned tarot kind of the most. So I am a huge advocate for classes. So may I just preface this by saying that I did start with tarot classes. More specifically, the first, I think, class that I took was with Rena Shesho, who is an amazing shamanic practitioner in Denver. I took a class with her, which was a little bit more art history focused, which I loved. Earth sign, perfect. And then I also took Lindsay Mack's Tarot for the Wild Soul. So I had those two in tandem with each other, and then I went and did this practice. So may I say, if you're someone who's wanting to get into tarot and kind of feel super overwhelmed and you like a class environment, I definitely recommend looking around where you are. I recommend, of course, above all, local practitioners first. And then also I do recommend, most of the stuff that I cite is from Lindsay Mack. You'll hear me cite her so often because I really like the way she does trauma-informed, inclusive tarot that really kind of changed the way that I thought about tarot. So highly recommend her too. So if you're a person that likes classrooms, I'm definitely one of those people. If you're a person that likes more structure, I definitely recommend going local reader first. Okay, all done. Good job. But second, this is actually an assignment that was given to me, I think by one of them. I can't remember which one, unfortunately. But it was the thing that kind of stuck in my head. It's the reason that I have really quick recall for all of the cards now, because there are 78 cards, may I say. That's a lot of things to learn. That's a lot of context to learn. And it can be really intimidating to people up front. The way that I learned tarot was through comparative analysis of the cards. I know that sounds like an eye roll, but I'll walk you through what that means. I more or less I used the Centennial Rider-Waite. It was commissioned by Rider and Waite, which was a publishing company, and the artist was Pamela Coleman Smith. So she was not actually credited for ever. And then they basically re-released this one deck, which has her signature on the back. That's what that is, Pamela Coleman Smith. And it's the Smith Rider-Waite. So just to kind of context on that, this is the deck that I usually recommend, most people recommend as your first deck. As always, do what you want, but a lot of the imagery that exists in the tarot world is based on this deck. So that is one thing that I would recommend, is to get at least this deck, right? At least the Centennial Deck. Here's the World. If anyone needs a tarot reading, there you go. The World card, listen to it. So what I basically would do is I would take this deck, and then I also happen to have two other decks at the time that I was gifted. I'm not saying as of right now you need to go out and buy 3 decks. That's not how I function. You can do all of this via research on the internet. You don't even need to have the decks in your presence. I only did this because I already had the decks. But what I did is I took every single card, all 78, took me a while, and I went card by card and looked at the differences and similarities between 3 different interpretations. That is how I basically got it to stick in my head. And so now I'm gonna show you we'll walk through this so you have a little bit more familiarity of like what I mean, and so you'll have an idea of what to do going forward. So you can use this process different ways. You can walk in already with knowledge of this main imagery, with this language, so to speak. You can take classes, you can do the research yourself, you could read a litany of books. I mean, there's a bunch of different ways to get this knowledge. That way, then you can just use that interpretation and see kind of the opposition or the similarities of other decks. You can also walk into this relatively open-ended and not having the knowledge at all. You can go the intuitive route, the completely intuitive route. So in that case, what you would just do is you would look at the imagery, you would look at kind of the implication of the art history or the style or of the specific depictions that happen in each card, and compare and contrast them in between. So you can take this in multiple different directions, but really at the end of the day, what it's kind of doing is solidifying your own story and what feels right to you about every card by kind of comparing it to other ones too. First thing that I want to say before I kind of launch into the specific cards is this is something I highly recommend you write down. So I had an entire journal that I almost entirely filled out just of card interpretations. But I am a person who writes to think. I journal a lot, so that makes a lot of sense for me. If you're a person who actually like redrawing these would help you, or honestly just like having a conversation about them out loud, I highly recommend that, so it can kind of like put into place the stories of these cards. First one that I'm going to talk about. So let me introduce you to the decks I'm going to use. So first is going to be, of course, the normal Smith Rider-Waite. Most imagery is based on this deck. It has the back that looks like this. And so we'll kind of start from that perspective. Second one I have is the Wild Unknown. Really amazing deck. This is what the back looks like. Probably not great for camera, but I like this deck. I know so many people who like, they either love or hate it, or they like they love it but they can't read on it. That's typically more of what I hear, but there are no humans in this deck, which I actually really like. And then the third one is the Mucha deck, or Mucha. I'm gonna say Mucha, so sorry if that hurts your ears, but the symbolism and the imagery of this deck is very similar to the Smith Rider-Waite, but it has some twists too. So this is what the back looks like. Beautiful. So that card that I showed you is the Two of Wands, right? So we've already kind of talked about this card. So let me hold them up separately. This is where it's gonna get tricky. So if you have all 3 of these cards, they're you know, more or less the story is the same of these cards. So if we go with this imagery, it's this gentleman who is on this cliff, very like verdant plains, like lots of flowers around him, right? And he's looking out over the water. He has the world literally in his hand, and like wands are about fire and about passion. So the idea is like, dream as big as you can. What is it you want, right? There is something to be said with the fact that both of these are like parallel to each other, right? So they're straight up, he's in this kind of portal of wands, right? So that is something that you can pull from any card, not just this one. Are the wands or the swords more parallel, or are they crossing each other? Are they crooked or cockeyed? Is there something like that that's happening? Because you can infer that like, okay, these ones are straight up and down and parallel. So there's probably gonna be an element of rootedness to it, of grounding, of clarity, right? Whereas if these were crossed or like kind of fallen over on each other, that would give you a different impression. So let's take this to the other cards. So in the Wild Unknown, this colorful one right here, one thing about this deck that I want to preface is that actually most of these cards are black and white. So the fact that this is rainbow colored, like all of the colors, says something about this card. That might, like, intuitively to you, that might be like joy and happiness and vivacity and just like party, right? Those could be the energies of you. It could also mean diversity. It could mean all of these different things that would be different to you. These are things that you would want to journal. One thing I want to point out is that your first read of this card might be like, okay, well, you know, if we're going by what I mentioned before, these are a little askew, right? However, look at them. They don't actually touch. This is supposed to simulate a pathway, an entrance, a runway for you to just like lift off, right? The change in color in the wands implies that this is closer to you and this is further away. So like, what does that tell you? How does that feel different from this card, right? It feels pretty different, but they're still kind of having that same energy. It's this beginner energy, this like, let's fucking go, right? So let's move on to this one. Let's interpret this guy. So same imagery as the Smith Rider Waite. So person standing in between these two poles, right? These two wands. One thing that you could notice is the fact that she is wearing this almost like nightgown, right? It's open, it's flowy, it's red. It's not this like blood red, but it's this like very sensual and romantic red. What does that say? Like, what does that conjure up in you? It conjures up like, to me, it more or less says like she's woken up in the morning and like is alone and is dreaming. Like this is the time she gets freedom, right? Especially because like, if I'm correct, if I'm not, I might be correct that Mucha's time of corsets, right? So like, why is she not wearing one? Not that like everybody needs to wear one in that era, but that's a question you can ask, right? So one other thing I want to point out, still has the like very green background, very fertile background, but like look at the sky. One, there's birds flying in it. Two, it has this hint of orange, which can imply either that it's sunset or sunrise. How does that change this card for you? Like, to me, it implies this moment of quiet, of internalness, of promise, right? So like, even just the difference between these two cards, this one's way more flat, way less personal, right? It has this gray sky. But like, how does this one feel in comparison to this? These are the things that you want to ask yourself as you're laying these cards down, and kind of comparing the two of them, because that's what's going to kind of imprint in your head. All right, next cards. Now we're going to talk about, 10 of Swords, right? So even if you don't know this card, you know that this one's like not great. No card is good or bad in tarot, but like, you know, what is this conjuring up for you? This guy's dead. This guy's like deader than dead. It's conjuring the end, right? So swords in the context of tarot are the air element. They're the element of thoughts and ruminations and ideas that you have. So if we kind of take that interpretation, we know that this card is one of just being like at the end, being so run down by your own thoughts, by your own ruminations, by the things that are flying around you that you are like dead. Like, look at that guy. R.I.P., man. So other things you can pull from this is that it has a completely black sky. And one of the things you'll notice in the Rider or the Smith Rider Waite is that black doesn't show up very often. It's used as an outline, but it's very rarely used in the actual card. So that's something that you want to pick up on too. If we go to the Wild Unknown, this is a visceral card, right? So like the fact that it's really black down here and white up here, and it's very scribbly. You can see that that's actually a bull that's been pierced through the eyes. I mean, that's fucking brutal, right? So like all of these swords are kind of shadows that have pierced this animal. And so like, damn, what does that tell you? What does that tell you? And how different does it feel from this, right? It's not too remarkably different, but this one is like a gut punch. So what does that tell you about this card? That maybe people who it comes up for are at this point of just being done. They're just being done. But at the end of the day, the kind of good part of this card, you know, that not all cards are bad, right? The good thing about this card is that you have nowhere to go but up. this is a new leaf. You can step away. Another deck that I actually really like is called the After Tarot, and it depicts this person who's taken all the swords out of his back and has walked away. With like, he's covered in blood, but he's done. His back is to the person and he's ready to move forward. So there's an element of that in this card too. Promise for another day, because you can't go any lower than where you are right now. If we go to the Mucha deck, way different card, right? So first of all, there's two people in this card. There's two people in focus. There's this dead guy, and then there's this guy. I can't tell if that gentleman is taking that sword out or putting it in. He is over top of this person, and that person is completely stabbed with swords, but there also are swords like around. Not all of them are in him. So, some questions you could ask yourself with this card. How would you interpret that then? So this person, if he's taking the swords out, is he trying to resurrect this person who's so clearly dead? Are you trying to like breathe life into something that's super, super dead? Or are you trying to murder something that's already super, super dead? Are you putting your focus where it actually shouldn't be? I think it'd be really powerful actually if this card had like a third person over here like coming up on this dude, because I feel like this very much is about like not actually accepting the circumstances of like something being done, like finished, you know? So like way different interpretation, right? Are you this person, you know? Like letting people stab you. So many different perspectives, but also like kind of, you know, can be read in so many different ways. So this might be the way that the Ten of Swords speaks to you, and this might be the one that sticks. But like you can still pull this card and understand that that circumstance is still there too, you know? Okay, next up, we've got another visceral one. The Three of Swords. So, okay, let's think of this one. If we don't know the context of this card, right? We know that these swords are piercing a heart. That's something that we can very much identify as humans. We understand what that means. It might mean betrayal, it might mean heartbreak, it might mean grief that we need to process. Regardless, these are three swords piercing a heart. You can also see in the background it has clouds and it's raining. Also another gray card, which definitely conjures emotion of grayness, of sadness, right? Okay, so then we go Wild Unknown. Very visceral card. We have the black portal in the background that's kind of like bringing you into this like really dark place. We have the blood dripping from down here. It's still conjuring that heart energy with the red cord. But the thing that this is adding is the fact that you feel bound, you feel stuck. You're like wrapped in this pain, right? There's no escaping. There's so much red ribbon around you that it's just like painful and hurts you. They're three different swords, whereas in this one, three of the same swords. What does that tell you is a great question to ask. Then we go to the Mucha deck. This has a person in it, which usually this card doesn't. Like when you see it, very frequently you rarely see it with a person. Not only is that a person, she kind of looks like a nun. So she's the sacred entity, right? And she has this heart here at her chest with the swords through it. So it conjures up sacred heart imagery, like the actual like imagery of a sacred heart with the flame usually on top, right? But it very much has that textual environment. Another thing to notice is that both of her hands are covered by this cloth. She's almost like hiding, right? So what does that mean to you? This can definitely bring up different things. There's a holiness to this. There is a context of like, grief is this sacred process. It's the sacred offering you have. You might feel completely covered and you might feel that you're hiding underneath this like cloth, right? That she's like covered in. She does have tears streaming down her face too. But it also has this element of like, those hands feel very sacred to be like this, right? All of this like can conjure up something completely different for you. See what that is, see what that means. Ooh, here's a great one. So this is actually this card is the reason I wanted to do this video, because this is a card I think that so many people are like, what? In tarot, the Six of Cups. So it's two children. It's the first time outside of the Ace of Cups where the actual cups are full of something. They have something in them. Flowers, right? These beautiful white flowers. They're bundled up as if it's winter. So it's very much this energy of like springtime. Springtime's coming, right? And they're gifting each other these flowers. Very frequently this card gets read as like nostalgia, which I just like don't get. I don't understand that. It doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense to me in the arc of stuff either. But what I kind of lean into is the idea, like the fact that they're children means something for sure. But I always like lean into the whole springtime thing. Promise. Promise is growing. It's not full. It's not a full-grown adult, but it's coming. However, then I came across the Wild Unknown deck and I actually saw this interpretation of this card and it clicked for me, finally. This is the Six of Cups. So this is all in black and white. Here's another kind of like, once again, look at the lines. So all of these lines are very even. They're evenly spaced. They're parallel to each other. So it symbolizes this element of order, right? Order, structure, comfort, familiarity, right? Because it's not crossed and it's not like messy like the other ones, right? So then you see the roots and it's this entire rainbow. It's this entire rainbow that is supporting just the top of this tree, right? Those are messy. Those are all over the place. They're like wrapped around each other. They're all different colors. It's just like this whole system underneath. So this is actually the interpretation that I take from this card. I connect it to the rune Othala. The idea that our heritage, our root system, our ancestors, whether that be genetic or not, are the things that actually ground us so that we can grow upwards as a tree. So to me, then if we kind of put this interpretation on this card, is the idea that new growth is coming, but it's coming from this place of history, of rites of passage, of the things that we've gone through. It's the fact that like your future self still has your current self in them. You're just growing from that instead of growing as a different tree. So I really love this interpretation of this card because it really, like, the fact that the color is down here feels really important, that like that is where your nourishment and your joy comes from. It's from that root system. And so this card is more or less calling you back into your root system so that you can grow as a tree. The part that's like visible, right? So I think this is a really great interpretation of this card, and really was the moment that I had like the aha moment of like, this is actually what the medicine feels like to me, that is true and real. So the last one I'm gonna go over, it's kind of like a two-parter. It's something that's very interesting to me that I actually didn't connect until I did this exercise. First thing that I want to talk about is the Emperor card. Traditionally, the Emperor card is this energy, right? White man on a throne with a robe, ruling, right? Very frequently, this card is shortchanged as the card of patriarchy, because that's more or less what we've known this like masculine solar energy as, is patriarchy. I don't read it that way because I believe that we deserve better than that interpretation. But like, you know, it's pretty easy to go into that realm because look at this guy. Wise, old, you know, ruler. And the rulers that we've known have very frequently not been compassionate or good with their knowledge and their kingdoms. Then you enter Wild Unknown, which, remember, doesn't have humans in it. So it's depicted as this amazing tree, this big tree. And up at the top is what I assume is a solar eclipse. So like the energy of this is like this tree grew from its root system and shades a ton of things, right? It's a huge tree. It doesn't apologize for how big it is. It doesn't apologize for how much space it takes up. It doesn't shrink in the presence of something that's like abnormal, you know, in the form of an eclipse. It is itself, and it takes care of the creatures in the land around it. So, you know, that is a great interpretation that you can take of the card. The idea of being big, of using your responsibility well, of not shrinking back in the face of the unknown, right? Then there's the Tower. The Tower I don't necessarily associate with the Emperor. I don't really connect them in general. It just didn't occur to me until I ran into the wild unknown version of the tower. So that, to me, it's the same tree, right? The same tree, right? In darkness. And then with the white tree getting hit by the lightning. So I was like, wow, that's a very visceral image, right? So when I journaled about it, I started thinking like, oh, well, okay, if we go to the normal imagery of the tower, by normal, I mean the Smith Rider-Waite, we have the crown getting knocked off by lightning, knocked off the tower. The kingdom is falling. The things that we've built, the infrastructure we've built, the parts of ourselves that feel like infrastructure, that feel like the scaffolding that hold us up, our identity, our relationships, all of those really big Capricorn kind of things are the things that are falling, right? The kingdom is falling. And so when you think about it in that circumstance, that's exactly what you built in the Emperor, right? He's wearing the crown falls, the kingdom falls. So of course, actually these would be connected, because in this card, you're questioning, what is it you wish to build? What is it you want to be known for? What is your kingdom that you're ruling over, right? You're asking these questions of yourself of like, if I am royalty, who am I? What do I identify as that is becoming the throne that I sit on? Not in a power over way, but how can I use my power just being this like Aries, amazing, like I am here energy, the energy of taking up the exact amount of space that you need and no more. How can you use that energy to build beautiful things, right? You're asking those questions in this card and they are falling in this card. So like, I would never have put these two together until I saw actually this imagery in this deck, which is like, that's a really great lesson to learn. That's a layer to this card that I've never thought about before. And I mean, the Mucha cards are like almost exactly two. Very similar imagery in these two. So those are some cards. I hope that helped. I hope that helped you kind of like see what I meant by kind of compare and contrasting and seeing what that information tells you. I think this is a really valuable exercise if you know what more traditional readings are, or if you have some kind of context to it. However, it is incredibly powerful if you don't, because at the end of this, if you go through every single card, which will take a while, but if you go through every single card, you are gonna know many stories across the board of each tarot card. And it'll also kind of give you, it wouldn't be mnemonic, whatever the version of mnemonic is for like a visual cue, right? It gives you more than one visual cues for a card that'll help you kind of have that recall in a way that's a little bit more in depth than just being like, oh, okay, tower means this, right? It'll give you a little bit more context. So, hey, editing self here. I didn't actually record an ending to this, so here I am. I know that was a lot of information, and I know trying to do that with 78 cards, you know, as 3 decks is a lot of work, but I really just wanted to offer this as a way to get to know tarot that isn't just reading from a book, taking a class, you know, looking up a card every single time that you pull one for a friend. I think in my experience, this has been a really formative way to really like get to know the tarot in a way that's independent to me. And is really connected to me so that I could then offer the best readings that I can. So I really hope this helped. If you have any questions, let me know. Let me know if this works for you or if you try it yourself. As always, if you want more content from me, please subscribe to this channel. I release videos every Monday and Friday. And follow me on the social medias. I do a lot of really cool work. So I really look forward to having conversations with you. And I hope you have a lovely day.